Hey, 42 here. He loves me not is a simple yes or no game played by English girls. But did you know that the French version, Ocular la Marguerite, has 5 different options with positive responses ranging from the lukewarm, he loves me a bit, to the intense, he loves me crazily. The French language has a myriad of words and phrases concerning love, with plenty making their way into other languages, rendezvous, ménage à trois, femme fatale, and more. So what makes the French so romantic? Is it something in the air, or is it something in the language itself? Can the language we speak control the way we think? It may sound like science fiction, but people have actually believed this to some extent for hundreds of years. And there have been studies that show that the language we speak can directly influence the way we see and experience the world around us. Linguistic relativity is the idea that a language's structure affects its speaker's worldview. The phrase was coined by an American linguist called Benjamin Lee Whorf, who famously studied the Hopi in the 1930s, a Native American tribe that live in Arizona. This is why you'll often hear linguistic relativity referred to as Whorfianism. Whorf wrote that the Hopi treated time very differently to much of the rest of the world, and suggested that this was reflected in and influenced by their language. He used the Hopi as an example of how the language we speak can influence the way we think. He discovered that the Hopi have no concept of time because their language contains no words used to describe it, such as future and the word time itself in English. So when a Hopi woman berates his husband because "I told you to skin that deer yesterday," he can simply reply, "Sorry love, I don't know what yesterday is." To be fair, this isn't quite what he discovered. Whorf's work is often mistakenly said to suggest that the Hopi have no concept of time whatsoever, whereas he actually found that the tribe have no general notion or intuition of time as a smooth flowing continuum in which everything in the universe proceeds at equal rate, out of a future, through the present, into a past. The Hopi also didn't seem to have words for units of time, in the way that we have minutes, hours, and days. So, did they experience the world differently if they didn't have the linguistic tools to describe time as a concept? Were their brains wired in a different way to ours because of the language they used to think and speak? Whilst Whorf laid the groundwork for this train of thought, he never had the chance to really experiment and test it, as he died in 1941, leaving behind several unpublished papers which were taken up by friends and colleagues. It was left up to Roger Brown and Eric Lenenberg to test a theory of linguistic relativity through experiments with colour. Brown and Lenenberg tested English speakers alongside natives of the indigenous Zuni tribe to see how well they could remember certain colours. They found the Zuni people, who don't have words to differentiate between different colours, for example between yellow and orange, struggled to remember these colours correctly. Meanwhile, the English speakers, who had words for these different shades, found remembering them and identifying them later in the experiment much easier. More recent experimentation on the same phenomena has equally shown that Russian speakers, who have different words for light and dark blue, are far more adept at quickly identifying different shades than English speakers are. Scientists have also been able to note surprise in the brain of Russian speakers as a colour display shifts from light to dark blue. To them, the colour has fundamentally changed, whereas English speakers lack the same surprise since all they see is blue getting a little darker. Our brains will show the same surprise for red shifting to orange, since we actually do have separate words for those two colours. Do these tests prove that the brains of the Zuni people, English speakers, and Russians are all wired differently? There certainly appears to be some sort of link between linguistics and cognitive skills. It seems that learning more words for colours made your brain better at telling those colours apart. The theory of linguistic relativity has fallen in and out of fashion over the years. From the 1960s to the 1980s, most linguists subscribed to the theory of universal grammar. that there are innate structural rules to languages, and that any humans will develop languages with the same basic properties, like having nouns and distinguishing certain colours. That's right, we're back to colours. Linguists love using colours in their experiments since it provides a link between perception and language using something scientists can easily control. They can measure colours by their wavelengths to ensure they're precise about any given shade. This time, Brent Berlin and Paul Kay were the scientists looking at how different languages describe colours. They wanted to find out if all languages approached colours in the same way. Was there universality about the way we as a human race talked about colour? By studying dozens of different languages, they found that there were innate restrictions on how many basic colour terms or categories a language could have. They identified 11 distinguishable colours that aren't too narrow in their usage, such as blonde, which we only use to describe hair and beer, or turquoise, which is just a bluey green. The 11 basic colour categories they discovered across all languages are white, black, red, green, yellow, blue, brown, purple, pink, orange, and grey. They also discovered that new colours evolve within different languages in a familiar and predictable pattern. Languages would always focus on the same colours first as they evolved. For instance, every language has words for dark and light. That's hardly surprising. These two terms eventually become black and white as other colours are separated out. But did you know that if a language only has 3 colours, the third colour to be added to the lexicon will always be red? The fourth and fifth colours will always be green and yellow, though these two can be in either order, and a language with 6 colours will always add blue to the mix. If every language adds colour names in this order, doesn't that suggest that colour recognition is something hardwired into our brains and part of our very nature? As opposed to the linguistic relativity school, which suggests it's the opposite, i.e. how we describe colours dictates how we perceive them. These discoveries were key to the universalist period of linguistics, but there's not much scientists love more than reigniting old arguments. And so, in the 80s and 90s, linguistic determination came roaring back into fashion, just like dungarees, unfortunately. This new, more low-key idea of linguistic relativity proposed that language is a key to culture. Clearly, the vaguer your statements, the harder it is to disprove. But this latest version of the old theory came back with some more shiny new examples, especially from George Lakoff, who heavily studied the metaphors used by certain languages. For instance, Lakoff noticed that in English, much of the language around time treats it similarly to money, in that time can be bought, spent, invested, and so on. Lakoff argued that these metaphors shape how we think about time, and that our approach to it might be different if we spoke a language where time wasn't equated to money in this way. So, can the words we use change our fundamental understanding of something like colour or time? It's an idea that's explored in The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, which was made into the 2016 sci-fi film Arrival. Now, a quick spoiler alert is needed here because it's a great film, definitely worth a watch. In both the book and the film, a linguist learns the language of an alien race called heptapods, named so for their 7 limbs. As she learns the language of the heptapods, the linguist's perception of time as being linear changes as well. Her brain is rewired by the language she now knows, and consequently, she is able to see into the future. In Arrival, the linguist eventually works out why the heptapods have arrived on Earth in the first place. Their language is a tool that they have gifted to the human race in return for a favour that heptapods will need 3,000 years in the future. So, how realistic is the idea that learning a new language can completely rewire our brains and grant us cognitive skills that seem downright supernatural or magical? This extreme version of linguistic relativity is generally agreed to be well beyond the realm of plausibility, but until we've encountered aliens and learned their potentially life-changing language, who knows? How about the more down to planet Earth idea that language changes the way we think about the world around us in subtle but impactful ways? This is less controversial, and it's pretty easy to find everyday examples of this, like how time is equated with money in English. Several foreign languages provide interesting opportunities to look at this effect through gender. The English language doesn't really have grammatical gender. In English, we only differentiate between the gender of people and animals with his, her, him, and she. And that's just fine. On a sort of personal note, I'll never be comfortable accepting that they as a singular pronoun is grammatically correct, despite the fact it's now entered the vernacular. But many other languages have genders for all their nouns. In German, spoon, fork, and knife are masculine, feminine, and neuter, respectively. The logic for this? While some nouns do have a thought process behind their gender, like how many flowers in German are feminine, there often isn't any logic at all. So, does thinking about inanimate objects as having genders influence how speakers of those languages think and perceive their world? You bet it does. A 2002 study looked at how native German and Spanish speakers described certain objects. The objects the researchers had chosen were carefully selected so that they were of opposite grammatical gender in each language, like a key, which is masculine in German and feminine in Spanish. When they asked the participants to describe keys, the German natives use adjectives like hard, heavy, and jagged, while Spanish speakers thought keys were intricate, little, and lovely. The word bridge is the other way around. It's feminine in German, and sure enough, German speakers described bridges as beautiful, elegant, and slender, while Spanish speakers felt they were strong, sturdy, and towering. What's more, these unconscious biases seemed to extend beyond the confines of their native tongues. Since the entire study was conducted in English, a language which all the participants were fluent in. What's more, the researchers found that the participants didn't even need to speak or read to draw upon these biases. When they were shown two pictures, one of a person and one of an object, the participants rated the pictures as more similar to each other when the gender of the person matched the grammatical gender of the object. So, any Spanish speakers watching this will presumably think I look much more like a bridge than a key, whilst Germans will say it's the other way around. I don't know which is more flattering. So, if language can influence the way we see the world and the objects within it, it's human nature to then ask, what can we do with this information? And depending on what sort of person you are, things can basically go two ways from here. Down the scary route, or the nice one. The scary route takes us into the realm of dystopian societies, something that was perhaps most famously explored by George Orwell in his novel 1984. Despite being written in the 1940s before much of the research we've already mentioned, 1984 goes hard on the idea of linguistic relativity through its use of newspeak, the bastardized version of English that Big Brother and the oppressive state use to control their subjects. Newspeak is the only language spoken in 1984, and it is carefully controlled by the state. It has a simplified and restricted vocabulary, which aims to limit freedom of thought. This makes it almost impossible for its speakers to articulate negative thoughts about their government or their own circumstances. By only giving the population a small set of simple, unambiguous words to communicate how happy they are, Newspeak removes any opportunity for creative, indirect, anti-establishment thoughts. Imagine trying to criticize something, but not knowing any negative words. This was a struggle that characters in 1984 found themselves in, all thanks to the influence that their language had on them. If all this sounds frightfully reminiscent of what the political correctness warriors are trying to do right now, that's because it's exactly the same. And yes, it's terrifying. Of course, language changing the way we think could also be a good thing as well. There have been several languages created with the aim of providing its speakers with a different, more positive experience. One language is Loglan, an abbreviation of logical language that was developed in the 1950s by Dr. James Cook Brown. Brown wanted to create a language that was so different from natural languages that simply learning it would force people to think in a different way. Loglan was amongst the first logical languages and spawned a similar spin-off called Lojban with the same aims. And it appears to have worked, since speakers of Lojban report improvements in logical thinking as they immerse themselves within the language. Lojban is also easy to learn and easy for computers to translate, since any word in Lojban only has one meaning. Compare that to English, where a word like get can mean receive, become, understand, move, catch, and learn. Whereas Lojban has the word kapaku, which is defined as gets, procures, acquires, obtains, accepts from source. Previous possessor not implied. Sure sounds useful if you're wanting to be ultra specific about your meaning, but I'm not sold. For me, part of the beauty of the English language is its ambiguity, and that's what makes conversing in it, reading it, and speaking it so damn interesting. Although its vocabulary is really interesting, as you would expect, it's all very logical. Each word is built from its equivalent in the world's 6 most popular languages: English, Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. Take the word for mother, mamta, and you can see it does indeed sound a bit like mother. Mukin, man, madre, and mama. Another example comes from linguist and writer Suzette Haydn Elgin, who created the feminist language La'adan that would make it easier to express a female worldview. She wanted to shape a culture where women could more easily express their views through unambiguous statements. The idea behind this was that speakers of La'adan could clearly express not only what they were saying, but the trustworthiness of their statements too. This is done through an evidence particle, a short addition to the end of statements that reflects how confident the speaker is in what she has said. Elgin wanted to stop women from constantly having to respond, "I know I said that, but I meant this," when men questioned their statements. Like a linguistic version of the point of view gun from Hitchhiker's Guide. Sounds positively terrifying. Pursuing the idea that speaking a certain language could improve us isn't a pipe dream. There are existing examples of natural languages that have honed their speakers' skills. For instance, Guugi Yimithirr, an Australian Aboriginal language, is famous for 2 things. The first is that it gave us the word kangaroo, though not in the way that the common myth tells us. The urban legend goes that Captain Cook and his crew encountered the animal and asked the locals what it was. The Aboriginals replied, "Kangaroo," apparently meaning, "I don't understand you." Anthropologists soon corrected this misconception through their studies of the Guugi Yimithirr people, but the story continues to be told to this day. The second thing that has brought Guugi Yimithirr into the public consciousness is that its speakers commonly use the cardinal directions of north, south, east, and west rather than using the egocentric terms like left, right, forwards, and backwards that we're used to. They don't just use these for giving directions and navigating either. Your left leg could be your southwestern leg, depending on the way you're standing. Now, this may well make some things more difficult. It certainly makes the hokey pokey a fair bit harder to sing. But speaking the language has its advantages as well. As a result of using cardinal directions all the time, speakers of the language have a remarkable sense of direction and almost always know exactly which direction they're facing. The same is true for speakers of Kuuk Thaayorre, another Aboriginal language from Queensland. Its speakers need to know which direction they're facing because this informs the direction they understand time to flow in. If I asked you to draw a timeline of your life, most of you would start with your birth at the left and progress through time from left to right. The Kuuk Thaayorre would arrange events running from east to west, regardless of which direction they were facing. If they were facing west, time would flow directly away from them. Turn 180 degrees and it would be coming straight at them instead. Having a number system forms the basis of so much of modern life. Without mathematics, there could be no engineering, no computers, no YouTube to watch this video on. But some languages don't actually have number systems, at least not in the way we do. Ask them to count a group of objects, and you may not get a precise number, just many. Without the ability to calculate exact quantities, our entire way of life as we know it would be impossible. And as much as this gap in one's language restricts thinking, it's equally possible that we haven't yet unlocked many other realms of possibilities simply because we don't have the words for them yet. The 7,000 languages spoken around the world have gotten us this far. Who knows what words and languages will be invented in the future that will allow us to conceptualize things that are currently impossible? That may be the next step in language affecting how we all think for the better. Thanks for watching. Have you ever felt like the sound of your voice is holding you back from expressing yourself, forging strong relationships, or furthering your career? Truth is, your voice can do great things. All you need is the right voice coach to unlock its full potential. Recently, I spent time with, in my opinion, the best voice coach in the industry, Richard de Bretagne, to help me find the right sound for my upcoming audiobook. Most voice coaches force you to speak like the Queen, but Richard helps you to enhance the natural warmth and enchanting tone of your existing voice in just a few hours of bespoke one-to-one lessons over Skype. Richard may be the best, but his lessons cost the same as a few cups of coffee. Visit hellovoiceover.com now, link in the description, to book and secure your lessons before they sell out. And exclusively for a short time, Richard is offering my viewers 20% off if you mention the coupon code 42. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider supporting me by joining the 42 Club here on YouTube by clicking the join button below or heading on over to Patreon. You can also get your hands on a first edition signed copy of my new book, Stick a Flag in It, by heading on over to Unbound Publishing and pre-ordering your copy today. And thanks to hellovoiceover.com for sponsoring this video.